Well now, you got no choice but to follow the tide. Ride the wave to the other side. We're all prisoners of destiny. Well, it's a damn plain to me that no one's free.
So we'll start with the resolution. Let me pull it up here. Resolved that Saul Alinsky, the famous community organizer, was a revolutionary neo-Marxist, and many of America's problems today can be traced to the destructive legacy of Saul Alinsky, mentor to Obama, Hillary, and the so-called thuggish wing of the Democratic Party. And we'll start with Dinesh D'Souza, 10 minutes for that resolution. Yes.
Thank you very much. Always fun to be back at Freedom Fest. And today I have my work cut out for me. It's a very awkward topic for me to be debating because we're debating the Alinsky legacy. And right here on the podium is the son of Alinsky and also the head of the Alinsky Foundation. So I kind of feel like I'm debating the legacy of Don Corleone, and here's Michael Corleone up on the stage, as well as the chief consigliere of the Corleone family. It's a little bit awkward. I'll have to try to get over that one. At the first glance, it would seem very difficult to debate two people who are so intimately familiar with Alinsky. What could I possibly know about Alinsky that, let's say, his own son wouldn't know? But I think that if we look very much at the example of the Godfather itself, you realize that very powerful people can have one public life and a completely different private life. The Don, for example, was himself a family man, very devoted to his wife, very straight-laced in matters of sex, very devoted to his children. And so here my point is that being the son does give you a certain privileged position, but you're also not going to see the man as he relates to the world. You're going to see the man as he relates to you. And it's quite possible that Alinsky was a lovely family man, a devoted father, while at the same time in public life being kind of a gangster and a crook. Now, my case on Alinsky really relies on three links in a chain, and to defeat the case you have to break one or more of those links. The first link in the chain is simply to say that common experience tells us that the Democratic Party today is completely different from the Democratic Party of, say, 50 years ago. In other words, the Democratic Party today is not the party of, let's say, Harry Truman or John F. Kennedy or even Jimmy Carter. The Democratic Party today is the party of Obama and Hillary, to a lesser degree, the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. It's a different kind of party, and something or someone made it that way. Now, that's the first link in the chain. The second link is simply to say, what are the distinguishing features of this new Democratic Party? The old Democratic Party seemed to be a patriotic party, generally committed to the same goals as most of us in this room, but the difference was over the means. What to do with American prosperity, for example, how to share it. Or, yes, America should be strong in the world, but is it better for America to be more or less interventionist? These were debates about means, but agreeing on the ends. The new Democratic Party, I would say, is characterized by three new features. First, a kind of rather systematic deployment of lawlessness in public policy. And so, for example, the immigration laws say one thing, but Obama does another thing. The Defense of Marriage Act says one thing, but he does another thing. Obama, in a sense, literally sees himself as above the law. The law is a tool. The second feature is a willingness to use the power of the state against your opponents. In other words, we live at a time where even the post office, the Bureau of Land Management, all these places have SWAT teams. And so for the first time, I think this new Democratic Party uses the power of the government, of the IRS, of the EPA, to not only enforce its will, but to bludgeon its opponents into submission. You get on the wrong side of these guys, they think nothing of sending the tax audit people after you. This is the new Democratic Party. And the third feature is enriching yourself by shaking down private corporations and the government. Obama and Hillary are both sort of global specialists at this. They figure out how to use leverage to public power to, in a sense, rent or sell public policy. And they also figure out how to enrich themselves enormously in the process. Obama was a community organizer, but you won't find him around any poor people these days. He's hobnobbing with the billionaire set. Bill and Hillary came to Washington, D.C., and despite having government jobs all their career, they have a net worth of $300 million. Even Saul Alinsky died, interestingly and tellingly enough, in Carmel by the sea. A community organizer who lives by the beach, and you may say dies to the sound of the waves. Now, this is the new Democratic Party. How did it get that way? I think the simple answer is it got that way, not entirely, but largely, through the influence of one man, Saul Alinsky, and the influence he exercised independently over Obama and over Hillary. So another key link in my chain is that Hillary and Obama were both at a formative time of life shaped by Alinsky. Now, Obama never knew Alinsky, never met the man. Alinsky died in, I believe, 1972. But Obama kept going back to Chicago. Why? To study under the Alinskyites. He even became a kind of Alinskyite instructor. And so I'm suggesting that he learned his scamming techniques from the Alinsky way. Hillary met Alinsky in high school, had a close relationship with Alinsky, brought him to Wellesley College where she was a student, was later offered a job by Alinsky. And so both Obama and Hillary, I think, at a key time of life, imbibed, you might say, the Alinsky KoolAid. Now I want to talk a little bit about that Alinsky KoolAid to see if it is recognizably the force behind, the destructive force, I would say, behind the America we live in now. Most people think that to figure out Alinsky, you got to go read the Rules for Radicals, because, gee, there's the dedication to Lucifer in one of the opening pages, and that tells you all you need to know. I think that that book actually tells you relatively little about Alinsky. First of all, the dedication itself is highly problematic. Alinsky was an atheist, probably like a good many of you in this room. He didn't believe in God, and naturally he didn't believe in Lucifer. So why does a guy who does not believe in God or Lucifer dedicate a book to the guy he doesn't believe in? Clearly this is not about Alinsky saying, I want to be the devil. Clearly something else is going on. Remember, Alinsky himself embraces Machiavelli, and one of Machiavelli's key pieces of advice is not to play your full hand up front. And so you can be fairly safe in assuming that the Alinsky book is not going to be the full and true window into Alinsky. You have to look someplace else. Normally, we would have no place to look, but happily, toward the very end of his life, Alinsky gave a series of interviews. This was in 1971, 1972, really concluding in the year he died. One was to Playboy magazine, a very detailed interview, and another one was to Harper's magazine, I believe. In any case, in these interviews, Alinsky basically said stuff that had never appeared in public or print before, and they give you a real window into Alinsky. The first thing he says is that from a very young age, I tried to figure out how I could get stuff for free without having to work for it. And he describes with great relish a scam that he developed at the University of Chicago for eating in dining halls without paying. And not only, now a normal guy would be like, I pulled off the scam, I'm a very clever guy. Alinsky, and we see the Alinsky method kicking in right here, is he said, I began to hold seminars around the university to instruct other students in how they could eat without paying for it. In other words, I think this was the birth of community organizing in the United States. Alinsky then graduates from school. He goes on to college. He studies criminology. And very interestingly, he then gets in with a series of gangs. An Italian gang that he talks about, and then most significantly, the Al Capone gang. And here Alinsky is very interesting because he talks about his interactions with the gang. At one point, for example, the Capone boys want to bring in an assassin from out of state to kill people. And Alinsky, far from objecting to the killing, objects to the high price of bringing in an out-of-state assassin. He tells the Capone guys, why don't we hire one of the local guys? They'll do it for less. Alinsky then tells Playboy in the interview, he says, he goes, I really admired the way in which these gang members could shake down people and extract money and stuff out of them. The only downside is that every now and then they got shot. They got knocked off. So Alinsky goes, it got me thinking about how I could pull off a similar scam without the risk of getting knocked off. And then Alinsky realized that crime is actually very similar to politics. And so Alinsky realized, and again, I'm not divulging Alinsky's private thoughts. Alinsky says a lot of the things that I applied to community organizing, I learned from the mafia. That is not a direct quote, but it's a paraphrase of a direct quote. So essentially, Alinsky took the mafia's shakedown tactics, which is essentially up against the wall, pay up or we're going to get you, and brought them into politics. And here we have really the beginnings of Obamaism and Hillaryism. I want to give a simple example of how this kind of thing works, and that is, since we're talking about it, Obamacare. So many people think Obamacare was Obama colluding with the American people against the insurance companies. That's the public face of it. It's a very Alinskyite scam. Let's pretend that I'm on the side of the people fighting for the little guy against the big bad insurance companies. Now, in reality, something completely different is going on. Obama is meeting behind closed doors with these same insurance companies and basically using threats and incentives to bring them over to support Obamacare. The threats are obvious. We're going to be taking over the healthcare system and it's going to look very bad for you if you oppose it. The incentive is more cunning. Obama says to the insurance companies, we're going to be forcing millions of Americans, including young people, lots of people who don't want insurance, don't want to buy insurance, we're going to make them buy it. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars in profits for you. So you have a carrot, you have an economic incentive in backing my program. So here's my point. This was smoke and mirrors. Obama is in fact in bed with the insurance companies, establishing government control over the economy, 1/6 of the economy, while pretending to be on the side of the little guy. This was really Alinsky's specialty. Alinsky's specialty was to indulge in the rhetoric of social justice, while in fact, being about what he even talks about in his book, ultimately for him it's about power. It's about power. In this country today, there is a great fight over whether or not the entrepreneur, the creator of wealth, the people who actually work and make stuff, should they have the power? Or should an outside group of self-anointed bureaucrats and experts who declare themselves to be progressive, on the side of history, on the side of the future, do they get to kind of come in and take things over and deploy wealth ultimately for their own gain, for their own private gain? This is the Democratic Party that we have now. Frankly, if you don't like Trump, this is how we got Trump. The reason that we got Trump is the Democratic Party became a party of ruthless Alinskyites. The Republican Party is a party of bespectacled gentlemen. And these gentlemen were constantly being thrown up against the wall, defenseless against the Alinskyites. And finally people said, we need to have a little bit of a big boss and a little bit of a thug and a little bit of a guy who can throw you across the room on our side for a change. Remember how defensive poor Mitt Romney was about his wealth. Trump has far more wealth, but no one even criticizes him for it, because you can't criticize him for it, because the more you criticize him about it, the more he boasts about having even more than you thought. So we are now in a Alinsky-eyed environment. Quite frankly, I admire Alinsky from a distance. He was a very scheming, clever man. He was an interesting man. And I think perhaps it is the accident of history, because he had no way of knowing at the time that his two proteges, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, both of whom seemed to have virtually nothing going for them at the time, in fact, had nothing going for them at the time, would actually reach the summits of power. But they did. And that's what put the Alinskyite method into operation. And it's a big legacy, although, I'm sorry to say, a destructive legacy. Thank you very much.
You can pray, you can sigh, trouble death heaven with your cries. You can laugh, you can sing, it isn't gonna change anything.